guys, it's Aoife from Words of Clover and I'm here to do my March reading wrap up. So as you guys know, the Irish Readathon took place in March and I got so many books read during that. It's always one of my best reading months of the year because I just love Irish books so much. So I'm trying to read as many as I could and this month was no exception. So yeah, I have a lot of books to talk about. I do have 2 vlogs up, part 1 and part 2 of the Irish Readathon as well, where I've talked about a lot of these books kind of while I was reading them. I was kind of talking through my thought process while I was reading them, and yeah, so I will leave those linked up above if you haven't seen that, and I will get straight on into the wrap up. So the first book I picked up was my book with green on the cover, and that was Where I End by Sophie White. This is a very interesting kind of literary horror book that is probably the best way I would be able to describe this book. We are following a character called Aileen who lives on this very remote island, and we learn at the start of the book that she lives with her grandmother. Her and her grandmother live in this house and they're a little bit ostracised by the rest of the island community, and for some reason, something to do with the past, Aileen is kind of thought of as bad luck by the other islanders, and so she's kind of not really talked to. People don't talk to her. They kind of consider herself bad luck. They could consider her bad luck, so they kind of avoid her, and so she's a very, very solitary character. She doesn't have a lot of, I guess, experience socially with a lot of people, and we see how she has been abused by a lot of people in her life because of this. And then we also learn that her mother is still alive, but seems to be in some sort of like catatonic state and needs to be cared for 24/7 by Aileen and by her grandmother. And this is starting to take kind of a toll on Aileen herself. She kind of feels like she's never going to be free of this, and she starts feeling very, very resentful towards her mother because of this. And then when a new woman comes onto the island and she herself has a young baby, Aileen kind of ends up having this very unhealthy obsession with this woman. We just start to see how things kind of all rise up to something that is probably eventually going to turn out really bad, either for Aileen herself or for people in her life. So yeah, this was kind of like a tense, very uncomfortable novel, and it's definitely something I can't say I enjoyed reading it because I felt very uncomfortable a lot during the book, but I also feel like we were supposed to. I think this is one of the reasons, like, what the author was trying to do. I think she wanted you to be uncomfortable with some of the darker themes. I did feel a little bit, you know, I don't think I'd be able to recommend this book to someone who has experience of maybe caring for someone, being a family carer in that way, because I feel like there was a lot of things in this that, you know, in terms of how they treated how Aileen treated her mother, especially as the resentment started to grow, it was very disturbing to read. So it was definitely like a bit horrific on that side, some of her actions towards her mother, and yeah. So yeah, I kind of like, I gave this like a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I didn't absolutely love it, but it's definitely something that I found really interesting to read, very original, and I would definitely read more of Sophie White's books in terms of what this style of writing that she is doing. After that, I picked up a non-fiction book, and that is Bessborough by Deirdre Finnerty. This is a book that looks at the 60s, the 70s and the 80s in Ireland, and we follow a woman in each decade who had an experience in the Bessborough mother and baby home, where they had become pregnant outside of wedlock and were brought to Bessborough to have their babies and then had their babies taken away from them. And this is kind of their experience in the home, as well as their experience trying to reconnect and find out more about the child that was taken away from them, and then how the experience affected the rest of their life as well. So I thought this was a really kind of accessible read. I've read like as you've seen in other wrap-ups from previous years, especially during the Irish Readathon, I've read other books that have looked at the subject of mother and baby homes in Ireland, while this one did look at Bessborough in particular. I think if you were kind of wanting to read a book about the subject to kind of teach you a little bit more about what mother and baby homes are like without maybe diving into things that are too dense, I think this would be a really, really great one to read. I really appreciated each of the stories that were being told. I thought they were told in a very kind of, I don't know whether you can say conversational way, but also a very accessible way for any type of reader. I think you could give this to anyone who was interested in reading the topic and they would be able to follow along with it and understand what was going on. And I appreciated that a lot about this book. This was good. It made me angry, it made me sad. would recommend people to read, so 4 out of 5 stars. After that, I read an anticipated read, which was Strange Sally Diamond by Liz Nugent. I actually have a whole video review about this, so I'm not going to talk about it too much, except to say that I really enjoyed it. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, and I will leave my review up above if you want to check that out. Then the next book I read was Edith, and this was by Martina Devlin. This is a historical fiction novel that is set in 1921, 1922 in Ireland, and we are following the later life of Edith Somerville, who was a well-known female Irish author. And this one was interesting for me in terms of the time period that this was set in, and as well as the class of people that Edith and her brother were in. They were kind of in, I guess, the Anglo-Irish kind of richer side, Protestant side of the Irish population. And so when the Irish Civil War was going on, and they were being targeted by the IRA and people who were fighting for Irish freedom because they were thought to be more along the side of the English, and they probably had a lot of ties to England. And we could see it was kind of interesting to see kind of a different side to the Civil War in that sense, and how these people were targeted when they were just kind of trying to live their life. And I have never really heard about Edith Somerville before, so this also made me want to read some of her books in the future. And yeah, I did kind of like her character. She kind of came across to me as this well-spoken older woman who really knows her own mind, kind of gets mixed up into things by accident, but also someone who's just really interesting, really independent, really well educated. And I enjoyed kind of just spending time with her in this novel, though I wouldn't say this book is anything extraordinary, but I definitely just enjoyed it in terms of learning about this woman in history that I never really knew about before. So I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. And then I had a little bit of a disappointing read, unfortunately, and that was 7 Steeples by Sara Baume. This is one of the books that I've been really and highly anticipating reading for over a year, and I really, really thought I was going to love this. This is about a couple, Simon and Belle, who get together, and then I think after a year of being together, they end up kind of upping their lives in Dublin, and renting this solitary cottage in the countryside and living a very solitary life. They kind of stop working, and they just kind of become this family unit of 2. They kind of stop talking to their friends and family, and just want to kind of live this very, very quiet life in the countryside, which is the 2 of them and their 2 dogs. And so we're just kind of following along with that. This book is kind of interesting in the way it's written, in that there is literally no dialogue, no conversation at all in this book. You're literally just being told day by day, kind of almost in a very monotonous way, what Belle and Si are doing all the time. And while I can see what the author was trying to do, it just didn't work for me. I just found this really, really tedious to read, really boring, and also I just really didn't like the characters of Belle and Si. I really didn't see the point of what they were doing. I could see the fact that they were obviously kind of stepping away from the world. There was a point where it becomes obvious that the COVID pandemic has taken place, and they really didn't know anything about it because they're so separate from society now. They didn't really realize what was going on until they were going into the supermarket and people weren't going near them, and we're looking at them funny for obviously not wearing masks or things like that. So yeah, it was just an odd one for me because I really want to love it, but I just really didn't. I really, really struggled with it. I will say there was a talent in the writing in this, in terms of some of the descriptions were really disgusting in a way that really worked. There was some bits in this book that genuinely made my stomach, genuinely made me feel ill. There was a scene, or there was a description of when they were asleep and they were talking. There was a lot of conversation about the nature around the house and in the house, from spiders and mice and the dogs and bits and pieces like that. And we're hearing about all the spiders in the ceiling and how they're catching flies, and how bits of the flies' wings are falling down onto their faces when they're sleeping. And it was really gross. And then there was another description about a butter dish that wasn't covered, so they didn't cover their butter dish, which I don't know why you would have butter on a dish and not cover it. That just I don't know. And then there was descriptions about all the things that was lying on the butter, that was in the air, from bits of skin and dog hair and all sorts. And it was really horrible. So yeah, they're there was a talent there with the writing. I just didn't really enjoy it. So yeah, this was like a 2 out of 5 stars for me. And yeah, it was really disappointing because I really, really wanted to love it. And I listened to an audiobook, and that was Light a Penny Candle by Maeve Binchy. This was like a proper, like a big chunky audiobook. It was like almost 900 pages. So I think it was like 18 hours long. And this is actually Maeve Binchy's debut novel. And we are following two friends who first get to know each other in the 1940s when Elizabeth is sent over to the home of Aisling and her parents. Aisling's mum and Elizabeth's mum went to school together. That's how they know each other. And then during the war, Elizabeth was sent over to stay with Aisling in Wexford while the war was going on. So instead of being sent off to the country like a lot of English children, she was sent to Ireland. And then Aisling and Elizabeth, while Elizabeth was in Ireland, end up having this friendship that kind of lasts for the rest of their lives. And we just see how their lives kind of continue on from the time they were children, and how they kind of both go on like kind of separate paths. Elizabeth kind of goes towards more like being a little bit more educated and kind of like more of like a single solitary life in a way, where Aisling ends up getting married a little bit younger, but she ends up in kind of like an abusive, like not a very happy relationship, and how their friendship kind of just keeps them going throughout all of their like ups and downs in life, and how they're always there for each other. I really, really enjoyed this, and I really thought this was going to be a 5 out of 5 stars for me. I just really enjoyed being with Aisling and Elizabeth, and like about their friendship and seeing how they supported one another. But I really thought the ending of the book was going to go in a slightly different way. And then the way it ended, I actually felt it was slightly almost depressing in a way, but there were just some bits and pieces that I just feel like didn't completely make sense for what we had learned about a lot of the characters coming up to that point. And I just would have liked to have seen the ending go in a different way. And I also think like this was like a 900-page book. I genuinely felt like it could have been longer. I feel like we could have cut short a part of a bunch of the characters like in their 20s and their early 30s. I feel like we didn't need a lot of it, where we could have spent longer with the characters then in like their late 30s, their 40s and their 50s. I actually would have liked to have seen the book follow them for like the majority of their life rather than just up until they're in their 30s. So yeah, this was like a 4.5 out of 5 stars for me. I really thought it was going to be a 5 stars, but it just missed out on it a little bit. After that, I read a short story collection that was Hearts and Bones by Niamh Mulvey. I originally got this from Book Break in exchange for an honest review, this copy. But yeah, this is just a bunch of different stories around kind of friendships, love relationships, and just the different relationships you can have with people. And I really, really enjoyed this short story collection. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I pretty much most of the stories in this would have been like a 4 out of 5 stars for me, and there was only one that I didn't really like, and that was because it had like a slightly supernatural theme to the story, which I just didn't think suited the rest of the story. It was a little bit of an outlier in terms of the theme. So yeah, I really enjoyed this short story collection, and it kind of made me realise I do want to try and pick up more short story collections, because I do actually genuinely quite like them. So yeah, I really like this. And then I picked up another non-fiction book, and that was Anseo by Úna-Minh Kavanagh. Úna-Minh Kavanagh is a journalist in Ireland, and she also does a lot of kind of live streaming, gaming kind of bits and bobs. And she's also a Gaeilgeoir, which means that she is completely fluent in Irish. She grew up in County Kerry in Ireland, but she was adopted from Vietnam when she was either 1 year old or less than 1 year old by her mother. And in this book, she is kind of documenting her experience being a Vietnamese Irish child, growing up in very like a white family in a very white area, and then being a fluent Irish speaker. And then as she grows up, kind of her relationship with racism in Ireland and how she's been treated, and how like the way she's been treated as well has kind of really instilled her love for Irish culture, and her love of the Irish language, and wanting to spread her love of the Irish language with other people and helping other people learn Irish. And one of the real like things I really loved about this book as well is her granddad, who is on the cover of the book. I absolutely love the cover of this book because it's her and her granddad, which I think is just so cute. Her granddad died when she was 15, but he was a very, very big influence in her life, and he was the main father figure in her life, and he was the one that kind of taught her Irish from the time she was very, very young. She like grew up speaking fluent Irish and English, and she really kind of attributes her love of the Irish language to her granddad. And I just loved kind of how this whole book was really like a really big love letter to the Irish language, but also to her granddad. And I just thought that was really, really sweet. I do think there's a little bit around this around social media and Twitter use and stuff that kind of gets a little bit tedious after a while and doesn't work in terms of like I wonder if you were older and didn't know that much about Twitter, if you would really feel that engaged when she's kind of talking about Twitter and some of like the interaction she's had on Twitter and on social media and that kind of stuff. And for me, like I literally deal with Twitter every single day in my own personal life and in my work life, so I know it really, really well. I just don't know if it worked as much as maybe she wanted to, but I still do think this was like quite a good book. I gave it like a 4 out of 5 stars, I think, and yeah, I enjoyed it. And then I had another one that was a little bit of a dud for me, unfortunately, and that was Heiress, Rebel, Vigilante, Bomber. And this is by Sean O'Driscoll. And this one we were looking at the life of Rose Dugdale, who was like a woman who grew up in England in like a very kind of wealthy family, but then she ended up turning away from her family and from kind of the wealth that she had grown up in. She kind of became a little bit more of a socialist, and then she ended up kind of joining forces with the IRA and like doing kind of extreme acts in the name of the IRA and in the name of Irish freedom in the north. I didn't really know about her at all until I read this book, and while I did find like certain parts of it in terms of Irish history quite interesting, in terms of like some of like there was a like a hijacking of a helicopter that like she ended up flying into like the south of Ireland, and then there was also like this art robbery worth like millions of euro, which I had never heard about. So like all of that was like interesting to read about, but I don't know, I just thought it was a little bit of, in terms of the book, I don't know, I didn't really like how the book was kind of making her out to be like this kind of like that, I don't know, like an idealistic person, I guess, but people were saying like there was about like how great she was and how caring she was to people who like, you know, other girls who would come into the prison with her, or then when she came out of prison and she joined kind of the like parents against drugs movement that was going on in Ireland at the time, when like drugs was like this really, really big, I mean it kind of still is, but there was a point where drugs was this huge problem, especially in inner city Dublin, and she kind of joined the forces about that, against that, and because of her IRA connections she was like a big like leader at the time in terms of this. But I was just like, but this like she's literally even though she didn't like kill anyone in terms of like shooting someone dead or anything like that, she is genuinely responsible for killing people because she had so much to do in the making of particular weapons and particular bombs that ended up going on to hurting and killing a lot of people, and I just couldn't get away from that. And so yeah, I just kind of felt it, I just didn't feel any connection towards her or towards the story, and yeah, I just found the story a bit boring, to be honest. I also kind of found it a little bit weird that like this whole book is obviously about like a woman, and yes, like the author is a man, which is fine, but the audiobook was also narrated by a man, and I'm like, why is a man narrating an audiobook about a woman? Like, why do we need a man narrating a woman's life? Like, I don't think we need that. But I did enjoy the book anyway, so it was 2 out of 5 stars. And then I read the group read, and that was None of This Is Serious by Catherine Prasifka. And this one ended up being kind of surprising for me. And like, I still am thinking about this book. And yeah, I'm not sure how many people will have actually liked this if they joined in the group read and read it, because I think it's a very kind of particular type of book and hits particular types of themes that I think maybe depending on your age as well, if and like where you're from in the world, if you're going to like connect with it or not. But we're following a character called Sophie, who is in her early 20s. She's just left college and she's kind of struggling with finding a job, as are all of her peer group. Some of her friends are emigrating. She has her sisters coming home from England. Her sister was studying in England, is now coming home, and she has a very weird kind of toxic relationship with her sister. Kind of like her sister kind of bullied her, I think, throughout when they were younger. And she has a lot of feelings about her sister coming home to live with her, and she really doesn't want to be around her sister. And then while all of this is going on, and she also has like romance issues and stuff like that, and romance problems, and when all of this is going on, one day during a party, this like crack appears in the sky, and no one can explain it, no one knows what it is. It's just like there's a crack in the sky, and she kind of ends up like becoming really obsessed, like what is going on with this crack, but at the same time just going on about her ordinary life. And I felt like it was just a really clever way of showing how no matter what is going on in the world, like your everyday problems are probably actually going to be the biggest problems for you, even though they're really small things in the grand scheme of things. they're like, because they're personal to you, they're going to be a big thing for you. Even if there's a crack in the sky, you're also going to be worrying about is if this guy likes me, or like, do I look fat in this outfit or something like that, like depending on your age and like how you feel about yourself and things like that. But yeah, I just thought it was a really clever way like of portraying all of that. I will say I thought Sophie was a really difficult character to follow because she's incredibly like insecure. She's really, really insecure in this book. She's a weird relationship with food as well. I might want to add like that. Like it definitely felt like she binge ate a lot in this book, and it was never really addressed in any way. She's very, very insecure, but at the same time incredibly self-obsessed. The way I guess any young person is before you have any responsibilities. You don't need to be thinking about rent. You don't need to be thinking about a mortgage. You don't have anyone depending on you. You can stay up till 4 in the morning looking at Reddit or looking at conspiracy theories if you want to. Like there's nothing like really for you to that you have to get up in the morning, if you know what I mean. So you're allowed to be self-obsessed in a way that Sophie is in this book. It's like the only time, I guess, in your life when you don't have school and you don't have a job, you're in this kind of in-between moment where you're allowed to be completely self-obsessed, and that's where we're getting Sophie in this moment. So she's kind of insufferable in many, many ways. But yeah, I just really liked a lot of the themes that this book explored. I do think they talked about like socialism and capitalism a little bit like too much, but I also do think that the group, like the friend group and the things people are talking about, like these people do exist. I just don't think they talk about this stuff quite as much as like the people in this book. And like it's a little bit too Sally Rooney as well. I feel like if you're going to be talking about people of a certain age, you have to be careful now if you're going to be like throwing in all of this like kind of political stuff as well, because people are going to compare you to Sally Rooney. So do you really want them to do that? Like if she'd left out a little bit of the socialism and the capitalism, she probably could have like avoided some of the Sally Rooney references when they're very, very different books, really. So yeah. But yeah, I actually really enjoyed this. It was kind of a pleasant surprise for me. As I said, I kind of keep thinking about it, and I think it's one I'm going to keep on my shelves because yeah, I just find it really interesting, and I definitely will read more from the author as well and seeing what else she brings out. So I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars, but I think it might actually be a 4-star because I just keep thinking about it. So yeah, if you've read this, I would love to know what you think, because I think this one is a great one for a book club as well, or for like a buddy read, because I do feel like it brings a lot of like discussion. I think you could talk about this book a lot. So yeah, I enjoyed it. And then I read a non-fiction book by a woman called Marguerite Penrose, and this is called Yeah, But Where Are You Really From? Marguerite is a Black Irish woman who was originally born in a mother and baby home. She was then adopted by white parents, and she grew up in a white family home. And she was also born with scoliosis. So she is talking about in this book her experience growing up Black and Irish, but growing up within, I guess, a white Irish family, and growing up at a time where there were very few Black Irish people around, or even Black people in general, or people of colour. So she's talking about her scoliosis and her experience with that, and her experience growing up with a disability, and how it has affected her life in many ways. I thought this was really enjoyable. It was very like a charming read. I thought Marguerite has a very kind of lovely, friendly, like easy going like way of talking. Like this book I felt again is very easy, very accessible. I think any type of reader would be able to pick this up and enjoy many different parts of it. I do think there was parts of it that were like a little bit on the simpler side, but I also think this is a book that is kind of supposed to be that as well. It's supposed to be for everyone. Marguerite herself, like she's not a writer. She's just someone who was asked to share her story, and she did. There's a lot of bits in this that I just really, really appreciated. I really liked the parts where she was talking about when she was younger and her parents brought her on a holiday to London, and she loved being in Heathrow Airport because of all the different types of people that she saw, and it was like one of the first times in her life that she didn't feel different in any way, because she was just another kind of, I guess, like Black face in a sea of like different types of faces, where in Ireland for a long time she was like the only Black person in her class, or the only like Black person in her area, and then also she kind of talked about as she grew up and as Ireland became a little bit multicultural, in many ways it actually ended up being that she ended up seeing racism increase, because as Ireland got multicultural, her experiences, like people kind of showed their racist side a lot more. And then also kind of her own experiences being a baby from a mother and baby home, and how in many ways her life could be so much different if she hadn't been adopted. She was actually had been put in kind of like an almost like unadoptable ward when she was born, because they thought that no one would want her, A, because she was born with scoliosis, and B, because she was black. So the nuns like didn't think anyone would want to adopt her. And then also kind of her struggles within herself to like whether she wanted to go and search for her birth mother or not, and how complicated that can be for so many reasons. I really appreciated learning about that as well. So yeah, this was enjoyable. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, and if you think it might be something you're interested in, I would recommend reading it. But as I said, it's a little bit on the simpler side, but I appreciated it for exactly what it was. I finished the trilogy of The Country Girls by Edna O'Brien, which I'm glad I did, because I've been talking about reading this for a really long time, and I finally read all of them. I really enjoyed my reading experience of this. I just think Edna O'Brien has such a unique, brilliant way of writing. I think her characters just absolutely pop off the page. I enjoyed reading this, but also I did find some bits a little bit sad, especially kind of in the third book. I feel like the lives of Baba and Kate, like, they don't really turn out the way I would have liked them to be. But I also think like this book is very much satirical in many, many ways. It's not a book to be taken too seriously, but I also think Edna O'Brien, through the satire of her writing, she was able to kind of really poke fun at a lot of ways that Ireland was so backwards at the time, and just have fun with her characters. And because of that, the writing itself is really enjoyable and really fun and exciting in many ways. And you kind of can tell that she's really trying to rile people up in many ways, and I kind of liked reading that. So yeah, this was like maybe a 4. I'm not sure if it was a full 5 stars, maybe like a 4.5 out of 5 stars, but I did really enjoy it, and I'm really glad to have read it. I do really want to go on and read a lot more of Edna O'Brien's other work. Then I read this short story collection, which is Táin, the Women's Stories, and this is by Karina Tynan. This is an interesting book that is kind of similar to, I guess, something along the lines of like Circe or like Madeline Miller or like The Silence of the Girls, and also I would actually compare it to Deirdre Sullivan's books Tangleweed and Brien and Saboteur Reply. We are looking at the Irish legend of the Bull of Cool, where Queen Maeve basically caused a war in Ulster because her and her husband had a fight about which one of them was richer, and he owned this lovely white bull and she didn't have a bull, so she tried to borrow this big brown bull that she wanted. And then when her soldiers went to collect the bull, they bragged that if this guy who owned the bull if he hadn't have given it, they would have just taken it anyway. So he decides, well, I'm not going to give it to you now. And then she ended up going to war over this bull. It's like a whole Irish myth. But this is looking at kind of the central characters in this myth, but mostly the women in their lives. So we're following like the mothers, the sisters, the lovers, the wives, the teachers of some of the famous warriors in Irish mythology. And we're getting the women's stories in a way. So yeah, I actually enjoyed this a lot. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, and yeah, I thought it was something like really interesting, really unique. I haven't read a lot of stories like this. I would love so many more books like this, and books like Deirdre Sullivan writes about Irish mythology, Irish lore, Irish women in mythology as well, because I've said there's so many ways that they are normally forgotten about in many ways, or else they're normally the villains or the pious virginal daughter or something like that. There's many ways that there are so many Irish women in history and Irish women in Irish mythology and legends and stuff that deserve their own novel. Yeah, 4 out of 5 stars. I enjoyed it, is unique, and I'm glad I read it. And then the last book I read for the Irish Readathon was The Book of Secrets by Alex Dunne, and this is my pick for reading a children's novel. And this one was really, really cute. This one actually takes place during Halloween, so if anyone wanted to pick this up, I would recommend picking it up in October or around Halloween time. We are following a little girl called Kat, who I think she's 11 at the start of this book, and we know that she lives with her mum and her little brother who's only just turned 1, and then her granny comes and looks after them, and her granny has always taught Kat about kind of fairy stories, and the two of them have the sight, which means that they're able to see fairies. They're kind of unusual in that way, that they're able to see fairies when they're out and about. And we know that this Halloween the fairies have basically come back to Clonbridge, which is where they're living, and they are having a revel, which is like a party. Uh, and Kat and her friend Shane, their younger siblings, end up being kidnapped by the fairies and taken to the revel, and they're like switched out. They're switched out with changelings, but because Kat knows about fairies, she realizes what they're after doing. So her and Shane have to team up and have to go to the revel, to the fairies, and try and get their siblings back. And also kind of like, like not really fight the fairies, but they have to stand up against the fairies to do this, and they have to figure out like how they're going to do that. So this was just like a really fun kids novel. I like the fairies in this. They're very, tricksy, evil, scary fairies, and I appreciated that because that's how I think fairies are. I do think they're kind of scary. I don't think they're cute, and like as much as I would like them to be cute and pretty, I don't think they are. I think they're quite scary. So yeah, I just enjoyed a lot. I just enjoyed everything about this book. I thought it was really, really good, and I give it a 4 out of 5 stars, and I would definitely recommend. Everything I've read for the Irish Readathon in March. Please let me know what you guys have read. If you guys read anything for March, have you guys read any of the books that I've read, or what you guys think about the books I've read? Please leave a comment down below. I would love to chat, and thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys again next time.